Hi everyone, my name is Tadro and I'm a chemical engineer with the Australian Wine Research Institute. Today I'm going to take you through a case study of Bortoli's solar installations and highlight some of their key learnings and considerations when installing solar. To give you a little bit of context, Bortoli is the 6th largest winery in Australia. They're located in Griffith in New South Wales. They crush about 100,000 tonnes per year and go through about 6,500 megawatt hours of electricity per year. In 2013, they won a grant from the government which helped them install two major solar systems, a 230 kilowatt PV solar system for electricity and a 200 kilowatt solar thermal system for hot water, as well as a few other upgrades like power factor correction and a few other things. First, we'll look at solar thermal. So Bortoli's system uses 3,000 of these evacuated apricus tubes, which is capable of them generating 12,000 litres of 95-degree water per day, which is plenty hot enough for all of their CIP and tank cleaning needs. There are basically two types of solar thermal collectors that you can get. There's flat plates and evacuated tubes. The tubes have a number of benefits. They have a greater exposed surface area at more angles of the sun's travel, making them more efficient collectors overall. And they're also inherently frost protected due to the vacuum that's inside them. But like with most things, they're also more expensive. Bortoli use a closed loop configuration whereby they have a fixed volume of water circulating through the tubes which exchange heat with the cold water that's fed into their boilers through a heat exchanger. This is a bit more of a complicated setup, but if you're in a frost-prone area, you pretty well need to use a closed-loop design regardless of your panel type. So even though the apricus tubes are frost-protected, the pipes that transport the water around in your system aren't, and if the water in the pipes freeze, then they'll burst. So a closed-loop system allows you either to run antifreeze in the loop, or just to run water and use the heat exchanger in reverse to warm the loop. If you need to, if the water's getting close to freezing. There are a few other things to consider. One of them is the weight of the panels. So remember these panels or tubes are full of water, so they do get quite heavy. Bortoli's solar thermal panels added about 10 tonne to the weight of the roof, and you need to consider whether the structure that you want to put them on can handle that. If you do need to reinforce the roof, it's going to add considerable cost to the installation. The second is the angle of the panels and whether you want to add frames to tilt them. Thought I had an animation there. It's gone. Yeah, so often the natural slant of the roof won't be the optimum angle for collecting the most solar from the sun that you can. So frames can be used to correct that angle, but again, they're going to add weight and cost to your installation. Another thing you need to consider in the way you make use of solar is your scheduling of operations and having I guess a well enough even flow to make use of the solar as it's generated. What this graph here is showing is the temperature in the storage tanks of Bortoli's hot water system, and you can see on the left-hand side there, all that time spent up at 95 degrees at the top basically meant that their tanks were holding all the heat that they could, and they weren't able to draw any more heat off the roof. So they rescheduled a number of their cleaning and other heating operations and changed some of their control systems, and now you can see on the right-hand side they're spending much less time up at that 95-degree peak. So scheduling your operations to actually use the heat as it's generated is really important to get the most efficiency out of your system. There are a number of things that affect payback of the system. Probably the most important is what kind of fuel you're coming from. So electric hot water heating is a lot more carbon intensive than gas hot water heating, so you're going to get better carbon savings and also better cost savings if you're coming from electricity compared to gas or LPG. Another factor is any modifications to the structure that you want to mount them on is obviously going to increase your install cost, and then just how much volume you're actually using and getting through. If we look at the greenhouse gas reduction from using solar hot water, De Bortoli is saving about 17 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents per year. The reductions that you'll get will depend on the kind of fuel that you're replacing. So, and the coal mix of the state grid that you're drawing electricity from. So, here in this table, we've got the kilograms of carbon dioxide per kilolitre of 95-degree water. You can see for some of the eastern states that have a much heavier coal mix, like Victoria and New South Wales, the savings are a lot higher than somewhere like Tasmania that relies on a lot of hydro, or South Australia with a lot of wind. And then as well, the savings that you would get coming from gas or LPG, which are lower because they're less carbon intensive fuels, but certainly still important. If we move on now to solar PV, so solar electricity, De Bortoli installed 3 circuits essentially on two different buildings at their winery. So they're driving 3 different circuits, 2 separate fridge plants within their winery, and then the general cellar, and also making 3 separate connections to the grid. So the rules for connecting a solar system to the grid vary in different jurisdictions, and it's worth becoming acquainted with those before you start. For De Bortoli, having a single connection above 100 kilowatts was going to be very expensive for them and have a range of different regulations attached to it. So it was much simpler for them just to make 3 smaller connections and not have to go through all the hassle of one large one. Because solar PV is an instantaneous energy source, appropriate sizing depends on your load profile. So this basically looks at how much energy you use, when you use it, and how consistent the flow is. So if you've heard us talking before at the Institute about energy efficiency, you've probably heard us talk about using off-peak power for a number of reasons. 1, it's usually cheaper, and 2, your fridge plant will run much more efficiently at lower ambient temperatures. So if you're doing most of your cooling work at night, you're going to get more efficient fridge plant as well as cheaper electricity. However, if you've gone and made these changes, then installing solar isn't going to do a whole lot of good, because you're using all of your energy at night, but generating all of your energy during the day. So with solar, you want to be doing as much as you can during the day while you're generating the energy, then switch all the extra energy use to night, and then the remainder back to during the day. Another factor in this equation is feed-in tariffs. So when solar first came in, there were a number of really attractive feed-in tariffs for exporting energy back to the grid, but for commercial systems, in most cases, these no longer exist. And in some cases, you can even get charged for exporting energy back to the grid. So, this doesn't have to be a risk. If you were in one of those situations, you just have a controller that cut your connection before you ended up exporting. But basically, in most situations, there's no benefit to having an oversized system. It's really just wasted capital. So you really need to look into your load profiles and how much energy you think you can actually make use of, so that you come up with an appropriately sized system. In De Bortoli's case, their annual export is less than 5%, so they've got quite a good sized system for them. This, of course, all changes when you add batteries into the mix. De Bortoli don't have any batteries in their system, but we will talk about those later. Again, with solar PV, frames to adjust the tilt angle are often required to get the most capture from the sun. But again, these can add weight to the installation on the roof. And there's also an issue of forces generated by wind on the back of the panels if you do raise them above the natural angle of the roof. In De Bortoli's case, tilting the panels would have increased their capture by about 11%, but they chose not to go ahead and do this as the gain basically didn't justify the cost. Most solar systems installed on roofs are passive systems, so they don't track the sun as it moves at all. They simply capture what they get. But you can get active tracking systems which will basically follow the sun as it moves through the sky. You can also do some creative things, and rather than installing your panels on a roof, you could install them somewhere like a dam, which gives you a number of benefits. A, you reduce evaporation from the dam, and B, because they're floating, they're much easier to turn and get them to track the sun. So this is a graph of Bortoli's solar monitoring systems. This is the output that they get from their monitoring systems, and you can see that their system's been tracking really well for the year and a half that we were monitoring it. Bortoli's currently generating about 365 megawatt hours per year, which is only about 5.5% of their total electricity use, but is still saving them quite a large amount of money, and also reducing about 297 tonnes of carbon per year. So your payback period will depend on a number of factors, including your upfront cost, your local solar irradiation, so how much sun you actually get in your area, which is something that you can check on BOM. How well you're actually utilising the solar that you're collecting, and the local electricity price that you're replacing. Often payback can be achieved within about 6 years, but we've seen examples of wineries achieving payback within 3 years. And you're saving about 0.81 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent per megawatt hour generated. If you want to have a bit more of a look, Solar Choice have a really good payback period calculator on their website where you can plug in a lot of your own parameters and get an estimate of what that payback would be. In terms of emission reductions, just to put it a little bit in context, in Bortoli's case, they're reducing their carbon emissions by 297 tonnes per year, which is the equivalent of about 61 homes, 72 cars on the road for a year, and the equivalent of about 7,600 trees planted, which is really cool. Okay, so Bortoli don't have any battery storage on their site, but because it's topical, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about these as well. So this pictured here is the Tesla Powerwall, which you may have heard about. This is their residential battery and made quite a lot of noise when it came out last year. And this is the Tesla Power Pack, which is their commercial size battery. Batteries allow you to regulate peaks, to hold power back for nighttime use, protect you against blackouts, and also allow you to generally have a larger installed system than you would otherwise. They also allow you to shift your operations back to nighttime loads, so you don't have to be so worried about when you're doing different electricity consuming operations, and you can also make use of the greater efficiency of your fridge plant at nighttime. There are a number of different battery technologies available. From left to right, we've got lead acid, which have been around for a long time and are quite cheap and poor quality. The Tesla batteries are a lithium-ion battery, which are more expensive but longer lasting. Aqueous hybrid ion batteries are quite interesting. The chemicals used are probably the most environmentally benign, but they are also quite physically large batteries. And flow redox batteries are infinitely rechargeable, but also a little more complex as they require pumps and other moving parts. I'm not going to go into each type of battery, but basically my point here is that there are a number of different technologies available and a number of emerging technologies as well. And the renewable energy sector isn't the only sector driving battery technology. The batteries are also one of the main limiting factors in smartphone development. We could put more powerful processors in phones, but basically we wouldn't be able to run them for too much more than an hour without improved battery technology. So there's a lot of technologies in the research space at the moment, which hopefully will come in the next few years. So it's a space worth keeping an eye on. There are a few other storage options for making use of excess solar electricity. One is to divert it into hot water. Hot water isn't the most efficient use of electricity, but I guess if you've got extra power and you've got nothing else to do with it, it's a good place to put it. Another option, which is very site-specific, is to pump water up to higher ground during the day if you've got, you know, an upper reservoir, and then irrigate by gravity at night. You could also run it through a turbine if you wanted to recover some electricity as it flows back down, but you probably need a reasonable amount of scale to make that worthwhile. So currently, adding battery storage to your solar system would roughly double your payback period. So if you had a payback period of 6 years, if you had batteries, you might be looking at 12. But the cost of battery storage has come down considerably over the last number of years, and as the technology develops, will continue to come down. This graph is showing the cost of solar panels as they have come down over the last 30, 40 years, and it's probably a 100-fold reduction that you can see over the last 40 years here, and batteries are expected to follow a similar curve. So that's all I've got for you today. If you've had any questions about today's webinar, feel free to contact me by email or just by ringing the Australian Wine Institute Research Institute. Thanks.